Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ralph Diemer. I'm happen to be your moderator today. And before we start our event, I should give you some details on how this whole event works. As you can see, we have a Zoom event. You are all muted, so you cannot speak by yourself. But of course, if you have any questions, please put them into the Q&A button, which is on downwards on your screen. We will include all your questions during the session and try to bring them forward to our speakers. Secondly, the event is also recorded. The recording just started, and it can be then, of course, played on our homepage. You will find that on our homepage afterwards, if you want to tell somebody about it, or if you want to look into it by yourself, that's possible anytime. Again, welcome. And we would start with some introductory remarks by our chairwoman, Monika Grefan. Monika, the floor is yours. You are muted, Monika, sorry.
I thought that you are doing that, so sorry. Now, welcome to our webinar following the COP28 climate conference. The COP28 just ended yesterday, and we want to give you a short debriefing about the results, but also an impression on the event itself, the atmosphere, and a little glance on what happened behind the scenes. For that purpose, we have invited two speakers coming from our membership who were present in Dubai. My very warm welcome to Jean Paquin, President et CEO of SAF Plus Consortium, and Thorsten Herdan, CEO HIF EMEA and member of the board of the eFuel Alliance. Today, we are looking at the results of the climate conference. The final declaration is practically hot off the press, and the main results are the International Fund to help those countries in need for reparation due to climate change damages is agreed and will be filled with $792 billion. The conference agreed to triple the renewable energy production and to double the energy efficiency gains. The end of the fossil energy production is kind of agreed, but this was obviously the most difficult part of the negotiations. And for us, as eFuel Alliance, it is a major goal that we want to replace fossil fuels by renewable fuels. Our members agreed that 5% of the whole European fuel market could be renewable by 2030, and the regular framework is adjusted accordingly. This would save 60 million tons of CO2 or eliminate the CO2 emissions of 40 million cars in Europe for 1 year. Just to give you an idea what would be possible. Of course, with these fuels, we will and can also eliminate CO2 emissions in the aviation and in the maritime sector, in off-road applications, and even in various industry sectors. The negotiations in Dubai have shown how difficult it is to reach global agreements on key issues, such as phasing out of fossil fuels. Nonetheless, the COP28 closed with an agreement that signals the, so to say, beginning of the end of the fossil fuel area. Even as it is not binding, the wording of the declaration is groundbreaking and sends a clear signal to all investors and users as well. The pathway towards a non-fossil age is laid out. Alternatives need to be developed and scaled up to bring this to reality. The good news is that these alternatives already exist. We now need to push for them, expand them, and offer them at competitive prices. And that's the biggest problem. The COP declaration also gives us an insight into the wide range of technologies that need to be made possible. In addition to electrical solutions, attention must be paid to carbon capture, storage, and utilization, as well as renewable fuels. This is where policy is crucial and political support is needed. The EU perceives itself as a pioneer and has made many groundbreaking decisions through the Fit for 55 package and has set the energy transition in motion. Even if there is a lot of work to be done, it is also clear that e-fuels have to play an important role in this transition towards net zero CO2 emission. We must be ambitious to change our energy systems towards renewables. We can't afford limiting technologies to certain sectors. We must now set the ground for changing the energy that fuels our future towards electricity, renewable energy, and renewable fuels. A lot of questions remain open, though. What are the consequences of the COP28 result? Is Europe to track also in comparison with other regions in the world? What role played the fossil lobby in the conference, which has heavily criticized? And what mean the results for our sector, the production of hydrogen and e-fuels? Many questions, and we are happy to get some insights by our speakers. And I will hand over to our moderator, Ralf Diemer, again, who will start the debriefing now. Thanks to all of you for joining. And I wish you, of course, a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and that we see healthy again next year. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Monica. So let's dive into it right away. We agreed with the speakers that to start with and to kick us off, they would one by one give us in 5 to 10 minutes some insights and impressions on the conference they found and they are, so to speak, experienced. And we would like to start with Jean Paquin, who is was already introduced. Joyce in the morning now because he's sitting in Montreal, Canada. So thanks for joining us even in this morning hour. Please, Joe, tell us what you found in Dubai in the last days or even weeks. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. I'm not seeing news on board. I don't know how many people are listening, but I can see about 40 participants. So a very warm welcome from a very cold place here in Canada, in Montreal right now. It's about minus 10 degrees. So a big change from the COP. Last week we were in the 30s. And now we're about 40 degrees below in Delta. So it's a heck of a change. The time zone's also kicking in. So it's early in the morning, but for me, I'm still in the afternoon, having just arrived a few days back. Thank you very much for our partners, eFuel Alliance, to give us an opportunity to talk about the COP. I did some little video capsules as we were going along, talking every day about what was happening and what was going on. And to be honest, a COP is a very funny and exciting thing at the same time. It's very active. You can never kind of know what's going to happen, and days keep on bringing you updated news. And you have to kind of move with the COP. So you can't really start, and we all like to do that, have our agenda plan. Well, you plan your agenda, and if you do that, it's probably the first mistake you do in the morning because everything starts changing as you go along. And this is exactly what happened this year. Not only was it a very active COP, but I was myself very present with two actors at the same time. One was the Minister of Environment for Canada, so moving more on the COP side, on the overall changes and modifications and requirements for environment, leading to strategic long-term goals, environmental goals and climate goals, but also on the aviation side with ICAO, very close to ICAO and ATAG as well, following them on what had previously been a conference called the CAF3 conference in Dubai 2 weeks prior to that. So in a nutshell, this is what we're seeing. Of course, like everybody else, and if you're not aware of that, the COP has actually agreed to introduce some very important texts. And believe me when I say that, every word counts in a final text. Every word, every meaning of the word counts. Every commas count. The way that the text is put together count. And that's why it's so difficult to get a final text accepted right off the bat, right? So the initial draft, triggers a lot of commotion, a lot of discussion, and this is why. And I'm not surprised that the COP went so far and went over its time, because the text here was oil and gas, right? It was fossil fuel, and it had to be introduced. Of course, it was the first ask was introducing. So that if you take a look at it from this high level perspective, it's as if you're putting you're asking for oil and gas to be introduced, and ideally you'd want it to be phased out. So you'd want to have a timeline on the phasing out of it. And then on the other end, you've got a lot of stakeholders that are saying, well, I don't want you to even talk about oil and gas. So you can imagine how the combat, the discussion, the negotiations go. It's just crazy. And I talked to negotiators in Canada that I was really close to them, and some in Spain as well. And they were telling me how difficult that was, because a lot of countries still have and are hanging on to that fossil fuel. And of course, we all understand, I don't think any of you online today need to be told that, fossil fuel isn't the way to go if you want to be sustainable in the years to come. So bringing that text from a transition away, for me, is a win, because even though, I think it's a win for a lot of people, as a matter of fact, but even though that win isn't exactly what we looked for, a full phase out, it still puts the word down. So it's going to be easier for next COP and next negotiation to drive discussions into that word. That word's already there. So the elephant in the room is now in the room, and we've acknowledged that. And I think that is a real good win. Is it quick enough? It's never quick enough. We know that. But it's there, and that's what's important. So from a COP perspective, I think this is really positive for any alternative, any transitional, and any climate change initiatives, clean tech, and now that brings me to the innovation side of the aviation. We were with ICAO and with ATAG and a lot of other stakeholders in the aviation. And clearly this year, they've made it very, very clear, a very strong statement at one of the first day, actually, at the UN. They took a UN room and made a declaration that sustainable aviation fuel is going to be the way to sustain the aviation, is going to be the main, not recipe, but the main solution to sustain the aviation and attain and achieve the net zero 2050 target that was set by 193 parties a little while back, a year and a half back, and signed and approved at ICAO at UN level. The second, very important, this is so crucial, and I've always pushed for that, is that the capital market, let's go back a little bit. If you want those projects, it's all fine, but the investment involved around projects like that, the investment needed for projects like that to take life, to be producing, to be real, is tremendous. We're estimating about $175 billion a year for the next 27 years to actually decarbonize the industry, the aviation industry. And we all know how other industries have to compete with that decarbonization as well. So when I heard, and when I was confirmed, and it was actually confirmed at UNC that aviation and ICAO with the CORSIA program was going to facilitate an economic, let's call it an economic model for capital market to actually gauge their investment and to assess the best and most, let's call them low-hanging fruit investment on the SAF side and the SAF project. I was very pleased to see that, because every time I had spoken with the capital market about those large investment of over $1 billion in projects, it was always the same answer. Yeah, well, we don't have reference. There's no historical reference to that. And the capital markets likes to have a risk-free approach, of course. And so, yes, they're investing in wind. Yes, they're investing in solar. And yes, they're investing in all sorts of other, let's call it linear or more normalized industries. But when you have SAF industries, especially like ours, in our case, it's e-SAF, it's electro-SAF, there's not that many industries in the world. So having the capital market to actually now have a gauge by which they can economically, in a pro forma, economically gauge which project makes sense for them is extremely important. And if I just to come back a little bit on the COP with transition and energy, how important is it that the word transition away from fossil fuel it becomes open and opens the door for gas projects, but also for carbon capture, hard to abate, or a carbon capture abatement of those oil and gas. And guess what? This opens the door, and this is the exact segue we were looking for. It opens the door to do a CCUS. So utilization is right there. So we're just a step away from starting to put transitional projects like, e-fuel projects that are using existing infrastructure, for instance, into the language of the carbon capture that the oil and gas industry will need to be using to do that transition. So honestly, I'm kind of pleased about the COP, except for the heat that was just tremendous. We came out of there completely exhausted, but I'm very happy about the outcome.
All right, John. Thank you very much for this first insight. So, if you have any questions again from the audience, please put them into the Q&A. Jean has to leave our call in about 15 minutes. So, if there is any question you want to address to him directly, you should do it now.
Ralph, just to let you know, I've actually extended a little bit, so I'll have another 10 minutes more or less.
Great.
I've called my call, so I'm pleased to say I have a little bit more time if you need.
Thank you very much. That's great. But anyway, maybe I can pass over one question Martin Kemmerling already asked. It's quite a broader question, but it's one which is always asked by potential users and also by politicians. So we are talking, of course, about those e-fuel projects. We talk a lot about regulatory impact. But in general, we are just starting. It's a starting industry. So the production is not there yet, and especially the mass production is not there yet. So the simple question is realistic to provide the required quantities of e-fuel for transport ship and aircraft worldwide. Maybe you can elaborate a little bit on that, and also where you think, you told already how COP helped in that respect. But of course, COP is only the umbrella, if you will. Maybe 1 or 2 points from your perspective, also on a global scale, because I know you are all over the place. How you perceive what additionally is needed, so to speak.
Yeah, well, the question is the question on the realistic approach to requiring quantities of e-fuel for transport and etc. I can't talk for other sectors, but can only assume it's similar. I always like to say, I use this analogy, and every time I use it, I find it very powerful. I use the analogy of an Olympic pool size of demand, right? So it's like you want to do a competition and you need to fill that pool with a lot of water. And we're now filling it with little bottles of water, a little glass of water. Guess what? You're not going to have a competition right away. And a lot of people are just going to be out of that competition altogether, right? So what we need to do is accelerate that process. And again, that comes back to what I said just prior to that. Having the words now on the mark, on the paper, right? Having it in a text, having it you can't ignore it anymore, makes people and lots of people of that look at their process, their own vision, their own strategy, and obviously are looking for solutions to make sure they meet these goals and these objectives to decarbonize, right? So coming back, and then we switch now to our projects, to e-fuel. What we did at a very early stage is understand that wasn't going to be just a one region kind of call. This was not going to be a book and claim kind of call. This was going to be a world regional call. We estimate about 3,000 of those plants by 2050 to meet the target. That's how big this is. A plant alone costs about $1.4 billion. Just make the calculation. It's tremendous money on the table in the next 25 years. And there's not going to be no other way to decarbonize but using that. on all the, for all the legacy planes. And I hear a lot of stories about, oh, don't worry about volume, don't worry about demand, we'll just wait for a hydrogen plane to come, for electric plane to come. That's going to come, yes, but not right now. And there's going to be a real big gap that we're going to have to fulfill. So my understanding of the realistic of things is it's going to be very difficult. And I'm seeing right now, because we're obviously very active in off-taker in the off-take market, I'm seeing those that are really active. We're calling, I mean, I'm not even taking calls anymore from people who are just asking about the thing. I'm taking call about people that are saying we're willing to put an offtake on the table. That's how it's become. And that wasn't like that 2-3 years ago. So it's accelerating quite a lot, but there's going to be people left aside. And my understanding is there might be a consolidation of the market or the sector at one point to actually fulfill the transitional carbon need in the next few decades. You're on mute.
Now I was muted. Happens always. The mistake happens always one time in every call. So thank you very much so far. I would like to bring in Thorsten Herder now. He's a member of the board of the eFuel Alliance and representing HIF EMEA. Also, a warm welcome to you from my side, Thorsten. What was your impression from the COP28, or what you would like to add to what Jean already said?
Yeah, that was very enthusiastic, Jean. Great stuff. So it looks a little bit as if you would have written the text at the end. Maybe you have, I don't know, but that sounds great. Maybe to add to that, and this is for me a very important part of this COP, because it was first time ever at a COP that we had an extremely big and great relationship between industry and government. That was never done before that way. There is a big thanks to the UAE. It was not only by the number of people. I think at the end there was some 100,000 people in Dubai sweating around, as Jean said, because it was indeed really hot there. And I was in Dubai, and then I flew back to Germany, and I flew back to Dubai and back to Germany, and it was always the plus 30 and the minus 10. But the main thing, we as HIF, for instance, we were part of the Chilean booth, right? And it was more or less a combination. It was the country, Chile, us and other companies, but everybody who stepped in was absolutely clear that industry and governments are together. And that is very much different compared to other COPs. So I've been attending some 10 COPs or so, specifically at those times when I was sitting at the other side of the power, meaning in the ministries. And I never experienced that governments were so keen on getting the input of industry, not perhaps to the very specifics of the text work, but also this, but very much, and that was exactly what Jean was saying, on how can we do it? How do we get to FID? How do we get from PowerPoint to projects? So the P and the P is the same, but the PowerPoint is nice and the project is necessary. And that is something which I never ever experienced at COP. The earlier COPs, it was very often that industry was there and governments tried to talk to them, but really were not interested at all. And now something happened very much different. That was the reason, I think, why there was a big exchange between industry and government. Government understood that we're not meeting our targets, right? We're not meeting our targets from Paris. We are not meeting our targets on renewables. We are not meeting our targets on hydrogen production. We're not meeting our targets in the transport sector and the building sector. So almost nowhere. And they understood that by just setting plans and just setting targets, writing them on paper, we will not have an FID. It doesn't work. Simply, it doesn't work. So there was a big debate. What can we do as a government to help industry to come to FID? That was very important for me. And as I said, extremely much different than in other COPs. And for us, for the industry, and also for the eFuels Alliance, it provides an opportunity to build on that, right? Because we, as industry, can give this advice They have to listen, of course, and hopefully after listening, they also have to act, but nobody else can give that advice. And that was really very, very clear. And with so many panels where I and my colleagues were present, we always saw the same interest because they understood we don't need it without you. One point. Second point was that this combination of tripling renewables on the one hand side and transitioning, and I think that is, as you said, very important, into phasing out fossils, has a coincidence, right? Because everybody understood that if we want to get away from fossils, there are the two ways. Either you build up renewable energy a lot, or you cannot get away from it. So the second way doesn't work. So effectively, there's only one way. And then in the game comes a very important point, which I also never ever saw at COP so far, that there was a debate which was renewables are electrons and molecules. So for the first time ever, I really understood that there is a big interest on how a molecule could be formed by renewable energy, meaning wind, water, bio, whatever it is, or PV. And that led us to the point of hydrogen, and I now call it renewable hydrocarbons or renewable other molecules, ammonia, whatever it is. And then it was more and more, we're not yet at the point, but behind the scenes, it was more and more understood that we can only deploy a vast majority of renewables if we put them in a bottle. If we put them in a bottle, whether it's an ammonia bottle, whether this is an e-gas bottle, or whether this is a renewable methanol bottle, or whatever it is. But if we don't do so, we are not able to deploy those renewables. For us, it was easy to demonstrate sitting in a Chilean booth and having this vast land in the south of Chile, in the Magallanes region. But that was the same for Australia. That was the same for a lot of the African countries, and of course of the UAE, right? Because they're also at some point of time stuck because the electrons cannot be used, at least not there where they are produced, so they have to be brought somewhere. And on the other hand, I also saw a big understanding that there is a group of countries which desperately need renewable energies, and there's a group of countries which are in abundance of renewable energies. And again, we're in the point where I try to not use the word e-fuel because it's always, it's more than a fuel, right? It's chemicals, it's for aviation, and it's everything. And if we look around ourselves and just for a minute imagine that we would have no hydrocarbons around us, then the world would look a little bit different. So, and all that hydrocarbons, as one example, is now fossil, and we have to replace by renewable. That's the one and only way. So what I want to say is that this type of discussion I haven't seen in Sharm el-Sheikh, I haven't seen in Glasgow, I haven't seen that elsewhere. It was here for the first time. Why? Because there was this fight, which John described on, are we going to phase out fossils, yes or no? It was absolutely clear. It was absolutely clear that Sultan Al-Jaber needed to have a clear document where he cannot just neglect that. So the way it was done with the text in between, I think that was very, very good set in scene by the UAE, and then they came out with this success. And I fully agree with Jean that we are now in a situation where nobody can escape from that wording. And if we now take together and look, for instance, into the next COP in Azerbaijan, this could be a COP of hydrogen. And not hydrogen meaning just usage of hydrogen, but meaning the understanding that this is the basic molecule out of which we can decarbonize aviation, out of which we can decarbonize shipping, out of which we can decarbonize chemical industry, out of which we can decarbonize all that cars and lorries and trucks which will not run electric in order to help the electric pathway to succeed. It's not a one or the other. And for that, we paved the ground with this combination of tripling renewables on the one hand side and transitioning to phase out fossils. So for me, to put it into simple equations, the big and great relation between governments and industry was a huge success. And the wording at the end of the day must lead to an even bigger cooperation between governments and industries at the next COPs to come. So for that reason, I was very, very happy at the end of the day. One thing I need to mention, which was not seen enough, and that, Jean, you mentioned that, is the financing. Because still a lot of governments do not understand that when we transition from oil and gas, we transition from a complete different business model to another one. So whilst oil and gas has, as you said, an existing market, we just dig it out of the ground, we put it into the market, we have the offtakes on balance sheet, more or less. The new system means that we need to build huge, very, very expensive infrastructure. Very, very expensive infrastructure. If we go for aviation, we just agreed, I cannot display the name, with a big airline and the refinery that we want to build a methanol to jet fuel facility. And then you have to build the infrastructure in wind or PV or whatever it is on that side. And you have to have the electrolyzer. You have to have then in our way, it's the methanol synthesis and the methanol to the jet fuel, or you go Fischer-Tropsch, whatever you do, it doesn't matter. But it's a huge infrastructure investment. And this infrastructure investment has a lot of risks associated, a lot of first of its kind technology in, and never ever those technologies were formed together. And now governments must understand, and they have not yet, and that was also clear at COP. So we also need to have something where we need to continue to work, that it is not only money which helps us, it is also a type of warranty we have to bring into the system from the government. So governments may be much better positioned if they understand that they maybe take some warranty of the process to help the off-taker to sign the check, which is a tremendously big check. And it always has to be a check which guarantees project finance. So we're talking on long-term off-takes at 15 years or something like that. That I have to say, in many, many discussions I had, was not yet understood. And to end with the very last point, it starts that the European players in the game understand that with their regulation, they are putting them out of the game, because their regulation means that there is no real certainty on whether the project finance will work, because the rules are unclear, just unclear. And that is something they start to understand, but we are just at the very starting point. So I also needed to put some water in the wine at the end. All in all, it was great, but we need to work on those two issues in order to get more projects into FID.
Yeah, thank you, Thorsten. Very interesting. Maybe one follow-up question, and then also one. I would pass this European thing for a moment also to Jean, because he, of course, is looking into Europe from two perspectives, from outside, but also as a person who is, of course, interested in the European market and wants to invest there. But when I follow the media, the European and also the German media, for example, then there was a significant amount of criticism about that basically the COP28 was dominated by fossil lobbyists. And of course, then the fact that the chairman himself at this time is kind of a member of this group, so to speak. It was very easy to make this criticism. Now, when I hear, Thorsten, that you said that the opposite is also true, that it was very good that industry and governments sit together. I would be interested, because I think everybody read this criticism, how you perceive this or how you see this from an inside perspective. Did you also see too much fossil people there, or was it different? Because also, of course, we know that the fossil industry is part of the solution as well. It's not only part of the problem, as we know. I don't know, John, maybe you want to start?
Yeah, that's so interesting. So, and thank Thorsten for bringing this up. I remember saying before I went to the COP, because I had chats. We have regular chats with our minister here. He's a very accessible man, Mr. Stephen Gilbo. And I had a chat with Stephen. I said, Stephen, what the, I'm not going to say it online, but you know what, having a chairman from oil and gas chairing, COP28, what is this? Is this serious? And he said to me, he said, Jean, there's two things that can happen here. One is that either we go on and we really have a complete mess and people pulling, lobbying, pulling so hard, nothing's going to be done. It's probably going to actually retract and go backward. Or we'll give them an opportunity to actually show that they mean business, right? They're willing to get on board to do that transition. And guess what? Both things happened, but the winner was the former, right? Because I remember seeing there was more than 3,000 delegates, lobbyists from the oil and gas, more than any delegation that was there. I could see them, I could feel it. You could feel it all the time. They were talking, they were in the media, they were taking the line, and they were really provoking because of their attitude, of course, of we've been around for a long time. We're the needed party, so you got to listen to us. We're not going to get away from that. And ultimately, what came out of it is a win. To me, it's a full win for the UAE. It's a great way to say, listen, I know I've got Saudi in the back, I got all my Emirates that are pushing, and we live on oil and gas, but we're just going to make sure that we're going to tackle this together. So I was extremely happy to see that happen. And from a developer's perspective, I'm not surprised that new sectors like that, and I come from the wind and solar sector myself, I'm not surprised as those new sectors, coming on the capital market and on the investment take time. Capital market need to have, and I said it before, they need to have an historical kind of an historical line. They need to see that things are working well. They're not going to get into risk. They're not going to get into issues. Those are 15, 20, 25-year investment. They don't want to have their fund damage or their access to capital or return, impacted by new technologies like that, even though they understand. I mean, it's irrelevant. I talk to them all the time. Believe me, it's irrelevant for them whether or not it actually it's not totally irrelevant. It was a bit false to say that. It's not irrelevant. They're looking at it, but that's not their main gauge. Their main gauge is, please show me the way not to shave that project so much that it's not going to happen because there's no return for us, right? And that is where we are. So when I see these things being put together, the message is so strong, saying the capital market, we're going to give you tool and we're going to give you guarantees that these things are going to happen. To me, is a wonderful way to actually go forward because it helps us put those projects forward and make them real.
Maybe just one word on Europe, because that would be, I think, interesting how you perceive that.
Well, Europe, I always said we work in different regions, right? So we work in Canada, in the US, in Europe. We're also now looking at South America, but also Middle East. Middle East opportunities are just unbelievable. I could tell you I would have probably half an hour of talk on that. It's just unbelievable. For those that are willing to invest, there's ways to go there that are just great. But anyway, coming back on Europe, of course, the mandate for us is a guarantee for the market, right? I always say that. And why do I see it? Because I see what happens when you put a subsidy on the table open for different sectors. You got everybody going in and saying, listen, I don't care where you're going. I just need the subsidy and have access to that. But I always said the same thing, and I never, in those last 6 years that we've been at this, never did I say or get away or stepped away from, we need to have some sort of subsidy in the market to make new sectors of activity go ahead, to make those new sectors of activity take form and be alive. There's no way you can decide or pretend to put together such a big machine, such a big transition without having the alignment of governments that are subsidizing in some shape or form. It would be, contract for differences, subsidies on energy, subsidies on low carbon fuels. Put it the way you want. You can't just impose all the time things to happen and leave it for the private sector to do that. It's only going to be given to a few fortunate to be able to mix and tie and align both the intention and the strategy and the capital market. It's not for everyone. And unfortunately, what that does when there's no subsidy is and no support for the initial stages of that is that a lot of good, very powerful technologies are left behind because they can't get through that first stage. They can't get through the feed. We're talking here about, you know, for those who might not know because they're not developers, we're not talking about a few $100,000. We're talking about millions of dollars before you even get a chance to present your project on the capital market. You know, 60 million euros before you actually go in the market and ask for capital of 1.2, 1.3 billion. Imagine what that does to a company, unless you have very solid stakeholder like we do, or a very solid, private capital, you're never going to get there. So imagine all the projects that don't go there. So that's why subsidy is really important. But, and I said it, it's also fundamental that you put a framework and that you say, guys, you're going to have to be there. You're going to have to face the music, and you're going to have to produce. You're going to have to do this because we need that transition. So I remember Financial Times calling me about 5 years ago on an interview, and they said, what do you prefer, the carrot or the stick? And I said, don't call it this way. I don't prefer anything. You just need to put the right elements in the market for things like that to happen, because they need to happen. That's it.
Yeah, thank you. There is a question from René Delbé. I would pass over to Torsten right away because it connects to what he said. If governments start to give the guarantee that e-fuels can be used as they are produced and have a reasonable tax, do you think companies would start to invest in the production of e-fuels, or is it or something else is missing?
Yeah, when I put thanks for the question. When I put the words guarantee or warranty, whatever it is in the game, for me it is important that I'm not a big fan of subsidies, John, by the way, because it's always a problem. You never get the needle out of the junkie's arm, and this sometimes drives industry into a bad
well, we could agree to disagree, but I'm okay with that. I'm okay. I make a comment.
No, what I want to say is it is, I think, a little bit different in the sector we're talking about, where we really have to pick this large infrastructure projects, and you're absolutely right. So we are at 80% feed in our plant in the US in Matagorda, which is 1.8 gigawatts, producing 1.4 million tons of methanol at the end of the day. And the sum you were just mentioning, 60 million, is a little bit familiar to me, while it's not having finalized completely the feed. And this is something which is at the very starting point. We are learning. So the next project feed would be much more cheaper. US works pretty well because the Inflation Reduction Act gives a tremendous amount of subsidy into the system to ramp that up. Like in Chile, we don't have subsidy because the wind is just fantastic. So effectively, the Inflation Reduction Act in Chile is the great wind resource. So what I want to say is, first of all, we need to look into the various regions. Then Canada has tremendously good potential and opportunities to deploy renewables there. But what we've never done before is to have first of its kind technologies, like an electrolyzer is a first of its kind technology in the size it is. People tend to think that electrolyzers are already something which is on the market since decades. No, it is not. And if you ask an electrolyzer manufacturer to give you a guarantee for degradation, which you need, otherwise you cannot give the offtaker the amount of fuel he wants to buy, then you won't get much more than perhaps 3 years or 4 years if you're lucky. So that is just on a component pathway. But what happens if you put all that stuff together and you're running into a problem? Then the project cannot guarantee because it's project finance. The offtaker will not take the guarantee. So that is where I think that governance could, more than just putting money into the game, think on guarantees to put into the game in order to back up if something happens. If you look to the NEOM project, without knowing all the details, but you can imagine that there is some guarantee of the Saudis in that game, right? and that's why it works. And that's why it works. But it is not enough, coming back to the question, Ralf, you were just reading out, because you have to have that stable framework. For instance, in Europe, it's a big disaster that even the not clear legislation is only fixed at the time when we have COD, when you go in operation, when you produce the stuff. So before COD, you don't have the guarantee that the legislation is the same as it was at FID. So you've taken FID for a multi-billion dollar euro project, and there may be 2, 3, or depending on how large the project is, more years where you build the stuff, and legislation can change in between. And then what do you do? So that is also some sort of a guarantee that, to my mind, we need to change in Europe, that once you take the final investment decision, you have to have the guarantee that the legislation is stable, as it was when you took the decision. That is very much the same in many countries, but it is not in Europe, just as an example, right? And then, of course, there needs to be a guarantee that green stays green over the time. That's one of the biggest issues, where we do not know whether, for whatsoever reason, the green electricity produced and then put the way further down the line, maybe up until aviation fuel, stays green, or whether some, sorry to say that, stupid regulation just changes the color. And then, of course, again, the project cannot take that risk. The off-taker will not take the risk. Ergo, you won't have FID. So that is also something where governments need to understand that they cannot change the rules in between, and they have to be very clear that they don't put that risk on the project or on the off-taker. That doesn't work.
Yeah, thank you very much. There's another question which is quite concrete, because there were also news that more than 30 countries agreed on a declaration of intent to facilitate work towards mutual recognition of clean hydrogen certification schemes, which of course is a very important issue for our products, the certification and harmonization of certification. Do you have more information on that? I don't know, Jean or Thorsten.
No, I did not. I did not get that information. I'm sorry.
There is also.
I have heard, but what I've done, I've participated in 2 or 3 panels where basically this thing was discussed, also with the ISO, the International Standardization Organization, and it's all on the point what I was just trying to mention, that green is elsewhere green in the world, and if we need to produce for each and every country a different product, the one is green, the other one is a little bit green, the next one is maybe perhaps green, then we end up nowhere. So that means this type of discussion was very, very intensive at the COP. What is green? How do we certify it? And do we get a worldwide green standard for that? Giving you again an example, pointing into Europe. Europe, we know it's a different green than like in Japan, right? Japan is very much looking on carbon intensity. So they ask, do you have the carbon footprint of your product? And if so, they look at that and decide whether it's a good one or a bad one. They don't care on a lot of stuff like additionality and our matching and the right CO2 molecule to be put into the electricity or the hydrogen. So for them, it's a different green. And what are we doing whilst producing the product? We need to have a product which is valid for the world market. So there was, all I can say, there was a big discussion on that. I don't know on that specific 30 countries approach, but there was a very big discussion on that, but not finalized at all.
Yeah, maybe one more, a little broader question from my side. Of course, big players besides Europe and the US continent, if you will, or the Americas, are China and India as the and some other Asian countries like Indonesia, for example, as the fastest growing emitters of CO2. And we didn't read much about China, for example, from this COP conference. There were many other players more in the forefront, which I found interesting because in last COPs, China, at least in my perception, played a very important role. So how was your take on that? And what was your take on the role of those players in this conference? I don't know, Jean, maybe you want to start?
Yeah, I have to leave in a few minutes, so I'll just start, and I apologize for that. I know this is very interesting and intense discussion. No, there wasn't a lot of present as in, for instance, Glasgow, but there's a good, I think, and that's my view, but nobody confirmed that. It's not written anywhere. But the discussion in Glasgow was more around the coal, the divestment, and then that really concerned China a little bit more than perhaps the oil and gas issue right now. And they wanted to be maybe in the second plan for that reason. So I didn't really see them to be that active. Another really little detail people might not know, but on the COP15 for biodiversity, China had been asked to actually lead on the chairmanship. So they've actually led in Montreal. Actually, was here in Canada. And they did a great work at that. So maybe perhaps the negotiations were more hidden in that for that reason. But overall, I think Asian countries have their own, and we know that from talking with our Singapore partners, have their own dynamic in terms of development. I can see Singapore, for instance. I've talked to some representative from Singapore being in a very high and keen development mode to increase tremendously, to double their capacity on aviation side. I think there are about 60 million people going every year at Singapore airport, and now they're aiming for 120 of those. So we all know what that means on the supply chain. And of course, again, starts, and my discussion with the Singaporean people was, well, you can't decarbonize using palm oil, right? And of course, that triggered all sorts of discussions. And then I don't even know where that got us. But I know that, they were justifying their way and we were justifying ours. But I say, if you're flying to Europe with that, might have some sort of issue. So anyways, that was my little Asian and Southeast Asian take. Also an Asian Southeast Asian take on Australia. Australia is pushing a lot for hydrogen solution, but they're looking for very large chunks of energy. We've had that coming, some of the players there coming here in Canada, and asking governments for a tremendous chunk of energy. And I don't think that's really realistic, that approach. I think you have to be more centered with the governments and really, tailor your need and tailor your strategy with what's available and see how you can but not come in and say, listen, I need your resource, I'm just going to get in. That approach to me is, I'm not saying everybody does that, but what I've seen, it was a little bit of a bold approach, and that might be counterproductive overall.
Yeah, thanks very much. And if you have to step out, Jean, thank you for your contribution and joining us. We are anyway nearly at the end, but Torsten, maybe you want to add something to what Jean said.
Thank you. I have to leave, but I really want to thank you for that, and we'll follow up with you guys. Take care.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Jean.
Bye.
Yeah, just very brief. I haven't talked too much to the to the Chinese people, apart from industry. And that's, again, a different point, right? Because Chinese industry is tremendously well positioned to get their technology into the world's game, which is good on the one hand side, because we need competition on that, and it brings more into the game. But they understood that there is a big chunk of renewable energy not deployed yet, and it needs to get technology in order to deploy that. But from the Chinese government side, I haven't had really discussion on that. But what I found very interesting is that, of course, it wasn't the region, but when you look into the African countries, taking an example like Morocco, there is a big understanding that they could be the solution provider for other countries which desperately need the renewables. So I could hear very clear saying the Moroccan ministers, look, without us, forget to meet your targets in Europe. You need us, and you need to treat us in that way that we can provide you with the renewables, and otherwise we put it somewhere else. So there was an interesting discussion going on. I have not yet the feeling that it was completely understood by the Europeans, because there's still a big chunk of Europeans which feel that they can be self-sustained. But well, there is another COP coming for that.
And in the meantime, we have to work on our European legislators anyway. So there will be a lot of talks. Yeah, thank you very much. So, Thorsten, there is one question from Roxana Serpa. She's quite specifically. I don't know if I should read it out, or if you maybe want to answer it by text also. It's going again on the question what kind of support you would need. So, well, I'm read it out now to answer it shortly.
Yeah, I saw.
She says, I'm on Thorsten, I'm on your side. That's also always good news, right? I don't believe on subsidies either. So the question now, what can Latin America do to support projects? Are you talking about legal stability at FID, fiscal stability? What areas should be covered by that guarantee? What would make the difference? Thanks.
Yeah, maybe I was not clear enough on that. So I think for the big infrastructure projects, it must be clear that whatever legislation applies, this will not change in the time between final investment decision and COP, so starting of production. Because then everybody can be clear, at FID, the law is fixed. And that is the case in some of the countries. That is not the case in other countries all over Europe. For instance, it is not. Then there is a big chunk when we look into Latin America on the permits. This is not a type of guarantee, but maybe we can also put it under guarantee, because if it takes too long to get permits for whatever type of part of the project, be it the renewable power, be it in our case, the e-fuel facility, then you are losing too much time, and time is money, and it will give you a big problem. Compare that to the US, the permitting procedure is extremely fast. Or other countries like Oman with Hydrum, they have understood that they need to cover that point. So for countries, and also Latin America, I think you have to have call it some sort of a one-stop shop, you know, to whom to go. And then giving you the guarantee of that other requirements which you have to fulfill. And you are not caught by surprise half a year later that completely new requirements are coming out of the box. That is extremely important. Otherwise, the money will go somewhere else. And many of the Latin American, to answer that, states have the guarantee of brilliant renewable resources. But again, that is valid also in many other countries around the world.
All right. So that was the last question from the audience. We are at 3 o'clock sharp. That was our time limit. Thank you, Thorsten, and of course, Jean, for your contribution and for making it possible that we can pass over our questions on the COP28. Thank you very much for that. Thanks, of course, Monica, for your introductory remarks, and Jan, who made it possible technically, even though he's not in the best health state right now. And of course, thank you all to the audience for participating. In case we don't see each other before Christmas, I wish Merry Christmas to everybody and a Happy New Year. And of course, stay healthy, which is at this time quite a challenge, as we can see. Yeah, thank you very much, and have a good rest of the afternoon. Bye.
Bye.